Hello, I'm Hallie Hart. The Oklahoma State football team's season opener at Boone Pickens Stadium is less than 4 months away, but there's still some uncertainty as far as who is going to be the starting quarterback for the Cowboys this season. Everyone's been asking the question, who is going to replace Mason Rudolph, the winningest quarterback in Cowboy history? So the answer has not been officially decided for that, and we're going to talk about the options for OSU's starting quarterback today and who is the most likely candidate to take that starting role. And then, speaking of winningest quarterback Mason Rudolph, we're also going to talk about why keeping Rudolph to Washington together is one of the best decisions a team could make in the NFL draft. As OSU's trying to figure out its quarterback situation for the next season, you have Mason Rudolph, who's moving on to the NFL. You also have James Washington, star wide receiver and Biletnikoff Award winner, who was actually drafted before Rudolph. So Washington was the 60th overall pick in the second round of the NFL draft. He went to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then shortly after that, you had Mason Rudolph going in the third round as the 76th overall pick. And the Steelers chose to keep Rudolph to Washington alive with that 76th pick as they drafted him as well. So Rudolph and Washington even had experience playing on Heinz Field, which is going to be their new home. They played there when they faced Pittsburgh at OSU, and they won 59-21. And so now the question is people have had differing opinions about how Rudolph and Washington are going to do there and if that was a smart move for the Steelers to draft both of them. And without Martavis Bryant, who was traded to Oakland, the question is, could Washington help fill his role? So there's kind of mixed reviews as far as whether he could replace Bryant. So the same thing has kind of been happening with Mason Rudolph. Some are saying somewhere down the line he'll be Ben Roethlisberger's replacement, and then others aren't that impressed with Rudolph. So even Ben Roethlisberger himself on a radio show in Pittsburgh said he was surprised that the Steelers drafted Rudolph. Of course, they're going to have to wait because you've got Ben Roethlisberger, you've got Antonio Brown as a star wide receiver, but I believe that drafting Rudolph and Washington both to the same team is one of the smartest moves that an NFL team could make. And I think it's one that teams should make more often if they have the opportunity to draft two guys from the same college team. I think that's a really smart move because they have that chemistry playing together. You had the whole Rudolph to Washington. Everyone really just rallied around that when they were at OSU. So I think with them continuing that, you'll have the OSU fans having more of an interest in the Steelers, and then you'll have two great guys who have experience playing together, and even if they don't get much playing time their first season, it'll be neat for them just to have that experience of joining the NFL together, practicing with the team, all of that, and then if they do have their moment to shine, then OSU fans know how they can do on the field together. As we look at Mason Rudolph, he was a 4-year starter at Oklahoma State University. So the big question is, with him moving to the Steelers, now that he's been taken in the NFL draft, who is going to fill the shoes of the winningest quarterback in Cowboy history? If we take a look back at some of Mason Rudolph's stats, he defeated every Big 12 opponent he faced at some point. In his senior season, he led college football in passing yards with 4,904. So without Mason Rudolph, who are the new candidates for quarterback and who is ultimately going to step in as the replacement for Rudolph and fill those shoes that it's going to take a lot for them? And I don't think any of them necessarily could be Mason Rudolph and set all those records, but when looking at the candidates for quarterback, I think there's one clear talent that stands out among the rest, and for me, that is Spencer Sanders. And so the question is, some people are saying that Spencer Sanders might be redshirted this first season, and the other guys who are at quarterback will have their chance, and then the season after that will be when Sanders can take the field. My take is that Spencer Sanders will see some time on the field this season. I don't think he's going to be redshirted, and I think he will ultimately end up being OSU's starting star quarterback this season. However, I don't think he will for the first game or so. I think OSU is going to give Taylor Cornelius a chance at the quarterback position for one game, maybe even 2 or 3, but then ultimately I don't think Cornelius is going to have what it takes to lead the Cowboys to the kind of season that they want, and that's when I think Spencer Sanders is going to step in and take over and step up as OSU's new star. So if we take a look through all the quarterback candidates, you have Taylor Cornelius, who is a fifth-year senior, and some positives about Cornelius is that he does know OSU's playbook. He's been there just kind of waiting in the shadows as Rudolph's backup the past 3 seasons, and so he's had the opportunity to know their playbook, and he knows the players, the receivers that he'll be throwing to, everybody he'll be working with on the field. He knows them, whereas some of these new guys like Drew Brown, who I'll talk about a little bit later, and Spencer Sanders, they don't have that advantage that Cornelius does of having the team chemistry already established and playing on the same team as those guys throughout the spring. So Cornelius did play in the spring game. He was the quarterback that the team kind of made their face of the team at the time. And he started at OSU as a walk-on, and he was a former zero-star recruit. But what he does have going for him is just the experience with the OSU program, even if he doesn't have the skill on the field that Rudolph did. But I think he's really just the Cowboys' face for the spring. And then, like I said, I think after being on the team for so long, having that experience, I do think Gundy will give Cornelius, or Corndog as they call him, a chance at the quarterback position. Gundy did say that if they had to choose a starting quarterback right now, he would be the starter and not Keandre Woodtie, who's been the other quarterback candidate who's already been in Stillwater practicing through the spring. And that's interesting because Woodtie actually was expected to be better. He was drafted as a 3-star recruit, whereas Cornelius was the walk-on 0-star recruit. And in the offense versus defense scrimmage, Woodtie did not even play because he was out with a bruised sternum. So that kind of changed the format of the spring game a little bit. Usually they have guys in white jerseys, guys in orange jerseys, and they face off against each other. But then in this one, you had it a little bit different just because Woodtie was injured. So it was just an offense versus defense scrimmage. And you had Cornelius with John Kolar subbing in for him sometimes. Even though they've been the only ones who've been around through the spring, you do have a couple other guys to consider. One of them is Drew Brown. He's a graduate transfer from Hawaii, and he's been in the mix. He's been one they've talked about as a potential candidate. However, I think it's important to note that Brown is only a verbal commit. He's not officially signed with OSU, so it is positive that he might change his mind come football season. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. And I think with Drew Brown coming to OSU, I think that really answers the question, too, that the Cowboys aren't going to rely on Cornelius, because if they'd really counted on Corndog, then I don't think they would have brought in Drew Brown. So I think that kind of shows that maybe they're not counting on Cornelius for that starting position. But Drew Brown announced his transfer on February 3rd. In 2017 at Hawaii, he threw for 2,785 yards and 18 touchdowns. A lot of people have said good things about his work ethic, so there's not necessarily hopes for him to become the next Mason Rudolph. Some have thrown him around as a starter, but like I said, he's not even official. It'll be interesting to see if he shows up, and I just don't know if he will get that starting quarterback job. I think ultimately in the end, after a few starts for Taylor Cornelius, Spencer Sanders is going to be the guy. And he's out of Denton Ryan High School. He was picked as the 14th best prospect in the whole state of Texas, so that's a big deal. And he committed to OSU on October 1st, 2016. Then he signed in December 20th, 2017 as a 4-star recruit, so higher stars certainly than Cornelius and higher than Woodtie as well. In 2017, he had 3,845 passing yards with 54 passing touchdowns, and then he also had 16 rushing touchdowns. So I don't think he'll be redshirted, and one important thing to consider there is Gundy burned Rudolph's red shirt. So I think what that shows about Gundy is if there is a strong talent on the team, he's not going to wait. He's going to play that guy and not take the chances of him leaving or anything like that happening. He got Rudolph out there, and I think what's going to happen this season after a few games is the same thing's going to happen with Spencer Sanders. So that's the situation with OSU football right now. It will be interesting to see what happens when the first game rolls around. It's against Missouri State at Boone Pickens Stadium on September 1st. And until then, I think the Cowboys have a pretty good look going. They've got some changes with new defensive coordinator Jim Knowles stepping in instead of Glenn Spencer. And so they'll have kind of a new, fresh team between that new defensive look and whoever steps up as the new quarterback. And in the meantime, then you'll have Mason Rudolph sticking with James Washington with the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL. I'm Hallie Hart, and this has been an OSU Football Update.